Okay guys, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and start today with writing equations from 2 points. So go ahead and copy this slide in your notebook. Make sure you get both sides, the left and the right, and push play once you're ready for me to explain. Okay, so anytime you're given 2 points and they want you to write an equation, they'll almost always ask you to write it in slope-intercept form. And then as we go on further in the class, you'll learn how to convert that form into different other forms. The first thing you have to do is find the slope. And we learned about slope last week, so go ahead and set up your table. Remember, this is our bottom-up strategy. The strategy is not to make you do extra work, it's to help you get the right answer. Okay, draw your box. Draw your arrows, and if you really think about it, it doesn't take that long, guys. So I'm not asking you to put in an extra 5 minutes of work or something. Set up our fraction with a minus sign in the numerator, minus sign in the denominator. Remember, we plug in y's in the numerator, so -4 minus -6, and we go bottom up. And then on the denominator, we plug in our x values, bottom up, so 3 minus 5, and then we solve for slope. So when we solve this, -4 minus -6, the minus -6 will become plus a positive. So it gives us +2 over -2, which simplifies to -1. So our slope is -1. And then you're going to take your slope, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight it in, let's do orange. You're going to take your slope and one of the 2 points. And honestly, guys, it doesn't matter which one. It's up to you. I always like to pick the first one just because my brain goes that way. If I have a point with just positive numbers, try to pick that one so that you can work with positive numbers instead of negative numbers. And we're going to take these numbers and plug them into my equation to find the y-intercept. So the equation, or the shortcut for that, is b equals y minus mx. Okay, so we're solving for b, the y-intercept. So I'm going to leave b equals, because I don't know what b is yet. I'm going to plug in the y value from this point, right here. So -6 minus m is the slope, so I'm going to plug in the slope that we just solved, -1, parentheses, now I'm going to plug in the x value from the same point, so 5. Okay, and then we solve the equation. So b equals -6. I bring it straight down. Here, remember, this is going to become plus positive, because anytime we have minus and negative, it becomes plus positive. And 1 times 5 is going to give me 5, so plus 5. And then we keep solving. So b equals -6 plus 5 is -1. That means my y-intercept for this equation between these 2 points is -1. My last step is to write my equation. So I'm going to write an equation in slope-intercept form, or y equals mx plus b. Just a quick review, m is your slope, b is your y-intercept. Now that we're done solving and we're just writing the equation, we leave y as a y. The only thing we're going to change is the slope and the y-intercept. So the slope is -1. We leave the x variable, -1 because the y-intercept was a negative. And then, as always, go back, double check if you have to clean up your work. In this case, we do. Let's clean up our answer. Our final answer is going to be y equals -x, because I'm going to get rid of this 1. It's going to become imaginary, -1. Okay, go ahead and pause the video if you have to add in any steps into your notebook. Okay, if you have any questions about these steps, how to write the equation, write them down in your notebook. That way, when we come back to class and we're working on guided practice, you know what questions you need to ask. Push play once you're ready to move on to the next example. All right, guys, so on our second example, we're practicing the same steps, but this time you're given a table. So I want you to pause the video. You do not have to copy the left side again. It's the same instructions. but sketch this table into your notebook the way it appears. So I want a horizontal table in your notebook because I want you to be able to see that in your notes and know what you did from there, that you converted it into a vertical table. Push play once you're ready for me to explain. Okay, so remember, think back to last week. Whenever you're given a horizontal table, our strategy to find the slope is to turn it into a vertical table. So sketch your vertical table in your notes. And remember, it doesn't have to be a large table because we're only going to take the last 4 values. So the first point I'm going to fill in is 2, positive 3. So 2 and 3. And I'm filling, let me circle it in a different color. I'm filling in these 2, just so that there's no confusion. They went into this first point on my table. The second point, I'm going to circle it in blue, is going to be 3, 5. Okay, so 3 and then 5. And then go ahead and use your bottom-up strategy. Draw your box, draw your arrows. It's important that you're doing the bottom-up strategy in your notebook. Again, I'm not there to double-check your notes, so I'm trusting you to do this because it's for your benefit and for you to understand this concept. Okay, draw your fraction, minus sign in the numerator, minus sign in the denominator. Y's go in the numerator, bottom up, so 5 minus 3. X's go in the denominator, bottom up, 3 minus 2. And then we're going to solve for slope. So m equals 5 minus 3 gives me 2. 3 minus 2 gives me 1. The final slope simplifies to 2. So I have a slope. And I want you to pause here before we start solving, okay? We are going to solve it, but let me point something out first. If you have a table or 2 points, whatever option they give you, I want you to get into the habit of checking to see if one of those values is the y-intercept. Sometimes they'll give it to you in the problem and you don't have to solve it. So a y-intercept on a graph, and I'm going to sketch it over here. When we have an equation that's graphed, a linear equation, the y-intercept goes through the y-axis, and this point where it crosses the y-axis, it's always going to be 0 and then some kind of number. So I'm just going to put a y because it's a y value. The x will always be 0. So always get into the habit of checking to see if any x values are 0. If you have x values that are 0, that's going to be your y-intercept. So that means this point, and I'm going to circle it in green this time, is your y-intercept. They gave it to you. You don't even have to solve it. We're going to solve it for good practice, just to show you that it does become that, but get into the habit of looking for that value. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve for it. B equals y minus mx. B equals the y value. Again, we can use either one of these two. I'm just going to use the first one because that's what makes sense in my brain. So the 3 is the y value right here, minus 2 for the slope right here, parentheses 2 for the x right here. And then we solve. B equals 3 minus 2 times 2 gives me 4. B equals 3 minus 4 gives me negative 1, and you see how it's the same value? Negative 1 in the table, negative 1 when we solve. So now we're going to write our equation in slope-intercept form. Remember, we leave the y. Substitute the slope for the m, so 2. We leave the x. Substitute the y-intercept for the b. Since it's negative, I have to put a minus sign, 1. So my final answer is y equals 2x minus 1. Okay, pause the video if you have to make sure you have all these steps in your notebook, and push play once you're ready to move on. All right, guys, last example. Go ahead and pause the video. All you have to add into your notebook here is our third example. which is the 2 points, -4, 3, and 8, 0. Push play once you're ready for me to explain. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by setting up our table for our bottom-up strategy. X and Y, -4 and 3, 8 and 0. Box in your values. Draw your arrows. And set up your fraction line. Minus sign in the numerator, minus sign in the denominator. Remember, we go bottom up, regardless of if the number is smaller or larger. Always bottom up. 0 minus 3, 8 minus -4. Okay, this minus and negative will become plus positive. So 0 minus 3 gives me -3. 8 plus 4 gives me 12. And then we simplify. Remember, if it's a fraction, you want to leave it as a fraction. The only thing you're going to do is simplify it because we want to have a rise and a run. So I can divide both of these numbers by 3. -3 divided by 3 gives me -1. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. So my final slope, just the slope, is -1 over 4. And then we're going to go ahead and solve for the y-intercept. So b equals y minus mx. Remember, it doesn't matter which point you use. Again, I like to use the first point, but in this case, I wouldn't, because the first point has a negative sign and the second point does not. So I want to try to avoid any negative numbers. So this time, I'm going to go with the second point. b equals, the y value in the second point is 0, minus the m, or the slope, is -1 over 4. The x value is 8. From here, we're going to go ahead and solve. So b equals 0. Remember, minus negative is going to become a plus positive. And here you have to remember how to multiply fractions. If you still struggle with this, it's okay, use a calculator. But just to recap, you need them both to be fractions. So I'm going to turn this 8 into a fraction by putting a 1 underneath. And you multiply straight across. So 8 times 1 gives me 8. And I'm going to write it over here on the side. 8. 4 times 1 gives me 4. But if I simplify this, I'm left with 2. So I'm not going to write 8 over 4 here to further confuse me. I'm going to write the 2. So my final y-intercept is 0 plus 2, which gives me 2. And then all we're left with now is writing the equation. Y equals mx plus b. So y equals -1/4 x plus, because this time the y-intercept is positive, 2. That's our final answer. Okay, pause the video if you guys have to. Remember to write down any questions you have so you can ask me in a few minutes during guided practice. Then come back to the Teams meeting once you're done.